Well, hello and welcome to another Topher project. My name is Topher Field. I help busy people like yourself to cut through the spin and understand what's happening in the world as it changes around us. Well, Canada's election was a surprise in some ways, but not in others. For those of us who survived the battleground Melbourne era in Victoria, it feels eerily familiar that a city, or in the case of Canada, a country that has been terribly abused at the hands of a tyrannical leader, would go on to re-elect, well, in our case in Victoria, we re-elected the man himself, Daniel Andrews. In the case of Canada, they've re-elected his party in the form of Mark Carney. It seems like a bit of a dark day. I thought I would reach out to a friend of mine in Canada, well-known international author Donna Lafromboise, to get her thoughts on things. Donna, I wish I could say hi under better circumstances, but nevertheless, welcome to the Topher Project.
Thank you for inviting me. It's lovely to see you again.
You've certainly expressed some dismay online about what's happened in Canada recently, the results of this election. Why does the election of Mark Carney bother you so much?
Well, as you say, we've gone through this terrible COVID era when there were human rights abuses, when freedom became a dirty word, when the government abused us, and rather than learning from that and kicking that government to the curb and saying enough of this, we need to turn the page. We need a government that respects us, that is about unity rather than division. The Canadian election happened, and we were very optimistic that we were going to get a change, and it didn't quite get there. So we have, we have a very divided population in Canada. 41% thought we needed a change, and 44% thought we should just keep going with this abusive relationship that we've had with our federal government. And so we're very disappointed because the energy looked very promising. It looked very high. It looked very good, but that's not what the result we got a few days ago.
Well, we, of course, in Australia have an election coming up very, very shortly, and I can't help but draw some similarities between Pierre Poilievre and Peter Dutton, our own opposition leader here. There does seem to be a desire to gain political points by distancing themselves from Trump. That's my interpretation of what I've seen from Poilievre. Is that how you see things as well, and did that work?
Well, for some of us who are, we admire what Trump's doing. We admire the Doge project, getting rid of government waste and being very clear about things like freedom. We in Canada are looking for some of that ourselves. We want our own Doge, and unfortunately, Poilievre distanced himself from Trump. And in Canada, we have a bit of a character flaw. We are a little smug here in Canada about, we're better than Americans, and I'm not sure what we base that on. It's long-standing in our national character, and unfortunately, what happened with the ruling Liberal Party is they played right into that anti-American stream in our consciousness, and it was like Orange Man bad all day, every day by the media. And what was a commanding lead in the polls for the opposition just practically instantaneously vanished, because the anti-Trump sentiment was so prevalent. So we're still kind of our heads are spinning from this complete reversal of what we expected was going to happen in the election.
Sorry to interrupt my interview with Donna Lafromboise, but I'm just going to be a moment. I am 100% viewer supported. I have no sponsors, I have no advertisers, and most of the stuff that I cover is too spicy for most of them anyway. So I depend on you guys supporting me by buying my books, by buying my t-shirts, my hoodies, my DVDs, and more. And you can get all of that from goodpeoplebreakbadlaws.com. Thank you so much for your support. Now back to the interview. Well, Mark Carney has promised carnage in the form of really going down this renewables net zero path, which we're going down here in Australia as well under our energy minister, a man that we've dubbed Blackout Bowen. We've just seen in Spain and in Portugal some very, very severe blackouts. The exact cause is still being debated, but as time passes, more and more it's being acknowledged and admitted that it probably was actually instability caused by the renewables themselves. Is this going to weigh in on the Canadian consciousness at all, or is that just one of those things that's going to pass them by and Mark will get to go and pursue whatever green dreams he has?
Well, we have a problem because our economy is based on natural resources. We are very blessed with lots of oil in our ground, in our country, under our ground, and we have developed very responsible, environmentally responsible ways to harvest that oil. But we have a mindset, and as you well know, globally, by
Mm,
influential people who think that their job is to save us from climate change and to keep the oil in the ground. So we now in Canada have a prime minister who is absolutely opposed to us
mm,
harvesting our natural resources. Well, that keeps our economy going. So if there's no oil, there is no economy here in Canada, and it's very difficult to take care of people and to educate people and to heal them in hospitals and to fund all of that stuff that we say that is important
mm,
without the natural resources. So we're a bit schizophrenic right now in this country, because we have a prime minister who has spent the last several years berating and browbeating all kinds of financial organizations to embrace net zero. And you
mm.
can't do net zero and have a Canadian economy at the same time. It's just not going to work.
The parallels to Australia with what you've just said are absolutely striking. Canada does have a few sort of separatist rumblings now and then here and there in various of its provinces. I'm on the other side of the world, so I can't say how serious or how substantial those movements may be. But do you think the election of Mark Carney, and particularly if he does pursue this hardline net zero line, do you think that's going to give some fuel to that particular fire?
Absolutely, absolutely. So Alberta is the economic engine. Alberta's where most of our oil comes from, and the Albertans are just they are in an abusive relationship. They're saying we send all of
Mm,
this tax money to the rest of Canada, and the rest of Canada isn't grateful. The rest of Canada, particularly the Quebec, is saying no new pipelines through our province. Well, Alberta needs pipelines to the coast. So it has to go
mhm.
one of two ways. And if Quebec is just hardline, there's going to be no new pipelines. We've got a serious problem. Yeah. So Alberta is saying we've had enough of this. Finally, we need to have a referendum. We need to vote on going our separate way. And I think that movement has just caught fire.
Well, my understanding is there was a recent constitutional referendum there that actually lowered the threshold of what would be required in order for that referendum to get up. I don't know. Obviously, I'm not on the ground over there to know whether it really will get up, but it's certainly going to be something very interesting to watch. I'm a big advocate of increasing the number of states that we have here in Australia, essentially seceding from the states,
Mhm.
not from the country at this point in time, but creating more and smaller states. So I'll certainly be watching events as they unfold in Canada. Of course, Canadians, and particularly those on the side of freedom, will remember very well the truckers, the time when you had just this amazing convoy standing up for basic human rights during the COVID lockdowns. That's something that you've actually written a book about. Thank you, truckers. And can you tell us a bit about why you wrote that book and what you saw as being so important that you wanted to put pen to paper on that?
So I went to the Ottawa protest, which was a 3-week protest by the truckers. I went there for a week to take photographs because a historic event was taking place and I
Mm,
wanted to record it. So I
mm,
went as a photographer and I had no intention of writing a book. And it was an appalling situation because I would spend all day walking around out there in -30 weather, talking to people, photographing what was going on. And then I'd get back to my hotel room and we turn on the news, and the news was telling a completely opposite story, that these were
mm,
terrorists, that these were
mm,
racists, that these were homophobes. And out there on the street, it was joy and love and dancing and music and people hugging, and in a way that they hadn't for 2 years because of COVID. So it was astonishing. You think the media is biased a little, you think the media is slanted a little, but this was exactly opposite to reality. So
mm,
afterwards, I expected that the journalists who were reporting that stuff would kind of come to their senses, do a reset, and say, "Okay, that's in the past. That was the heat of the moment. Let's talk honestly now about what went on."
mm,
But that didn't happen. It didn't happen at all. So 3 years on, mainstream media in Canada is still saying that the truckers are demonizing them, marginalizing them. So I realized that if someone was going to tell the story of what happened from the perspective of these grassroots working class truckers, I guess it had to be me because no one else was
Mm,
going to do it. So I spent 3 years going around interviewing the truckers, and these are ordinary people. There have been some other books that have come out about the Freedom Convoy, and they've been usually written by a spokesperson or someone who was, kind of a leader. There have been the
mm,
stories of the actual ordinary truckers who just got behind their wheel, drove sometimes thousands of miles, haven't
mm,
been told. So that's why this book is different. And so I'm just going to hold it up here. Thank you, truckers, Canada's heroes, and those who
mm,
helped them. And so there's 20 truckers from both coasts and lots of in between. And then, as it turns out, there were all of these other Canadians who stepped up, who went to Ottawa, put their life aside, stood out there in the cold and cooked 3 hot meals a day for the truckers.
mm,
It was
mm,
amazing. It was this amazing, wonderful, joyful, hopeful event. And
mm,
it's part of Canadian history now. And so my book is an attempt to document that. And I've been
mm.
saying to friends, if you're a little depressed right now because of Canada and what's happening with Canada, this book will heal your heart. It will take you back to that time, those few weeks when ordinary people did extraordinary things in Canada. This was the real Canada that we saw during the convoy. It was amazing. It was amazing.
It's incredible, Donna. You and I haven't spoken since I believe it was 2012 when I came to your home and I interviewed you for a project that I was doing on climate change called the 50 to 1 Project. And yet I'm listening to you speaking and it sounds so incredibly familiar and such an incredibly warm conversation, because what I'm hearing you say, talking about ordinary people doing extraordinary things, talking about your internal need to say, hey, someone needs to tell this story, someone needs to document this and make sure that the world doesn't forget, is so personally familiar to me. That's exactly what I observed in my hometown of Melbourne, Australia, during our lockdowns, where we became the most locked down city on earth. And it's exactly the reason why I went ahead and made the documentary Battleground Melbourne in the first place.
And
I
it's
applaud your
amazing.
work. Sorry?
And your film is amazing, and it has helped the world understand what went on in Australia. So kudos, really.
Well, thank you. That's very kind. But I think it's so important that people like yourself, and I love the fact that you're saying, yes, there are other people telling their stories, and those are valid stories and they're important stories. But also let's get these stories over here, the people that maybe weren't the spokespeople, they weren't necessarily the people with profile. And I particularly love the fact that you're focusing not just on the truckers. The truckers were vital. I'm not taking anything away from them, but you're also taking the time to focus on the people who helped them, because that's such an important part of any of these stories. If someone wanted to get a hold of that book, Donna, where would they look?
It's on Amazon. It's on Amazon Australia. And one of the things that happened while I was writing this book was that it became it's a very Christian friendly book, because
Mm,
so many of those truckers turned out to be Christians. And the reason they were in Ottawa was because they have this framework. So quite by accident, this has turned out to be a book of stories about loving your fellow man, fellow woman, and the power of the Christian analysis to
mm.
change the world.
Well, Donna, I think I'm going to have you on for a slow chat at some point in time. I get the feeling you and I could catch up for a very long time indeed, and it would be both enlightening and enjoyable. But unfortunately, that is all we have time for today. That was Donna Lafromboise, author and friend. You can find her book, Thank You Truckers, on Amazon. Thank you so much for watching. My name is Topher Field. This is the Topher Project, and I help busy people like yourself to keep up with the world as it changes around us. I am 100% viewer supported, so please head over to goodpeoplebreakbadlaws.com and get a copy of my book, in addition to getting a copy of Donna's book from Amazon, of course. My books, Good People Break Bad Laws and Good Christians Break Bad Laws, are about civil disobedience in the modern age. And of course, you can get the DVD of my multi-award-winning documentary, Battleground Melbourne, as well as my shirts and hoodies and a bunch of other goodies. And that's what enables me to do what I do. So thank you so much for watching all the way to the end. The algorithm loves you, and so do I. Please leave a comment. Make sure you've subscribed on YouTube. Check out this recommended video while you're here. And as always, stay free.